I used to enjoy driving over those moors. Silly as it sounds, I don't anymore. When I come to where the first graves were found, still get a chill down the back of the spine.
I've heard this.
And I know one or two more people.
Yeah. Strange feeling.
You know, just get that strange feeling of foreboding as you're going past them.
They chose a very strange place for their courtship. Saddleworth Moor is a grim, forbidding place where the legends say in other centuries children were murdered then and buried.
They must be able to carry out the things that they've done. I mean, it's such a horrendous crime. It's such a horrendous thing. I mean, I'm sure it'll go down in history forever.
As the trial unfolded, the facts began to speak for themselves. They had brutally murdered, between them, 3 young children. I think the evil came out in the tape recording that everyone heard in the courtroom of a little girl, Leslie Ann Downey, screaming for mercy, pleading for her life, and Myra Hindley, in a very matter-of-fact way, for example, saying, "Shut up or I'll hit you one." She was appealing to the maternal instincts of Brady and Hindley, saying, "Please, Mummy, Daddy," and it fell on deaf ears.
I didn't want to believe it was Leslie on the way to the moor. I was praying it wasn't her. And first of all, I saw her clothes, and the police said to me, it could be another little girl's body, but with Leslie's clothes. I just couldn't believe people could be so evil.
Saddleworth Moor on the edge of Manchester. 2 decades ago, a young couple chose these moors as a burial place. Their victims were driven to the moors from this house, some 8 miles away in the suburb of Hattersley. Children were kidnapped from the surrounding towns of Hyde and Ashton-under-Lyne, enticed by promises of toys and sweets. At this house, they were subjected to merciless and prolonged torture by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Brady was obsessed with the writings of Tussaud and with Nazi torture techniques. His aim was to test the limits of the youngsters' endurance to pain and record the results on tape and in photographs. At their trial, the court heard how the victims were tied up, naked, and made to adopt pornographic poses. The manner of the killings was exceptionally brutal. Ian Brady also took photographs by the graves as a souvenir. The full extent of what Hindley and Brady did has never been reported. To this day, the press have agreed to comply with a general embargo on printing details or photographs. But the basic facts have been enough to haunt the public for over 20 years. The pitiless exercise of power over a small, terrified child, the infliction of agonizing torture and then killing, probably comes as near as is possible to capturing the essence of evil. This series is about evil. About what causes it, about understanding it, about confronting it. And first, about its nature. In the medieval worldview, mystery plays explored the great enigmas of life and the universe. Why was there suffering in the world? What was the road to salvation? In their answers, the idea of evil was paramount. The world was a battleground between the forces of good and those of evil, with evil personified in the form of the devil.
The great!
I, God, greatest in degree.
But it was a conflict in which both Satan and God inflicted evils on humanity. In a fallen world, God punished man with natural evils, such as earthquakes, famines, and floods. Moral evils, like sin and human depravity, were caused by the work of Satan.
Through wickedness and sin, thine, through the passion you put yourself in, and mine, by my temptation, you sent down to my belly, where endless pain is and misery. One thing I'll tell you truly, you'll be delivered. Never!
Having left the medieval world, what meaning does evil have in the modern age? We know the causes of natural evils, like earthquakes and floods. Their roots are scientific, and so they are now called disasters or tragedies. But as we have heard, in the realm of human depravity and cruelty, science has not dissolved the mystery. The term that captures the experience of that depravity is evil. So what exactly do people mean by evil? David Parkin, Professor of Social Anthropology at London University, has devoted years to studying the uses and meanings of the term.
This pub is on the edge of Saddleworth Moor. Its landlords have lived in the shadow of the murders ever since the story broke over 20 years ago.
The first time when it happened, I think the thing that made people really hate Hindley and Brady was that the evil in them was the pleasure they got in actually sexually torturing these children and killing them. It was a pleasure.
Did they do all this for kicks, or?
Well, I think they must have done. They must have done it for kicks because they did it more than once, didn't they? It wasn't just a sort of accident that experiments went a little bit too far and they actually killed them.
It was premeditated, wasn't it? They went around looking for these children.
And they went out looking for them after that.
Yeah.
They must have enjoyed the first one so much that...
I mean, the horror of it is as well. I mean, they took these kiddies for picnics, and those kiddies were walking to the last picnic. Tortured beyond belief. There's no excuse for that. They were evil people, and they went out to kill.
Yeah.
And that's all
for
there is
their
to
own personal gratification.
That's it.
Do you think that, really?
Yeah, but I don't know really. It's fascinating, this, but I'm not sure in my own mind what the motives were, really.
Well, the motives were there, just for sexual pleasure.
Was it?
And the mind,
Well,
one of them
not-
had a mind that was over the top, and they could go around.
If not, why tape it? Why take photographs?
One idea that emerges is acts being evil because of a particular kind of killing, as an end in itself, either for pleasure or gratuitously. But there is more to evil than that. 3 of the children's bodies have been found on this farmland on Saddleworth Moor. It belongs to the Crowther family.
I think they must really. They're like wild animals, really, to do what they've done.
Evil is a word which really you can't really put into further words, can you? It's a word which sort of describes something horrendous and something which is quite horrific. It was horrible to think that the body had actually been taken past the house and buried there while we were here.
You see, David slept in the bedroom nearest to the road. And I think that I felt it a bit more.
I felt very vulnerable at the time.
You know, it was a bit unreal, that part of it. I think that it must have been premeditated.
Yeah.
I mean, they must have thought it out. They must have thought, well, we'll have to dispose of the body somewhere. But it isn't just an act done on the spur of the moment, is it? I mean, possibly you can forgive to a certain extent acts that are done on the spur of the moment. I think it's when they thought out from beginning to end what they were going to do and how they were going to do it.
Do the views expressed by the landlords and farmers give us a clearer idea of what precisely is meant by evil? Well, they've all mentioned some common ideas. The farmers stressed the premeditated nature of the killings. The landlords at the pub talked about killing for pleasure. But I felt one of these in particular put his finger on it. He said, "I'm not sure what the motives were really." In other words, he emphasized the apparent wantonness of the killings. If anything does come out of all this, it's an idea of evil as that which stifles life without purpose. But a hatred of life is not the only way in which acts are defined as evil. To those like Hugo Green, its meaning is something that he has to confront daily.
You ask what is evil. I am not sure that I can give you the theory of it, but I understand the effect of it. Because my own family, indeed my community, were destroyed by evil that was unchecked. It's not an idea, it's a fact. Look. Family, civilized, devout, reasonably socially responsible, a mother, a father, 2 children, an 11-year-old, my brother, taken to a place like Auschwitz-Birkenau to be exterminated. You ask what is evil? It is when people dethrone God and put into the place of God an idol or a series of idols. I think you then was the ultimate in evil. What happened in our century and in the place which was thought to be sort of the height of civilization, the successors, well, certainly chronologically, of Goethe and Beethoven, dethroned God, put a Führer in God's place. And when you look at some of the pictures of these big parades and rallies of the 1930s, this is a paganism with all of its symbols, emblems, its hyped up emotions. You can see that the 10 Commandments, which in my tradition is kind of one of the bases for morality, is literally stood on its head. You shall not make any images. Well, of course, the whole thing was surrounded by images and people bowed down to it. and worshipped it. And the more absurd the image and the more excessive, somehow the greater the enthusiasm for it. And the third commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, by decency in speech and thought. Everything was taken in vain. Nothing remained sacred. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, that kind of slavery had no rest. There was no cessation. There was no regard for creation, which is what the Sabbath celebrates. On the contrary, creation was being destroyed, quite deliberately. Honor your father and your mother. It was a system in which children were taught to betray parents. And sometimes parents betrayed their children. You shall not murder. They worship murder and killing. You shall not commit adultery. But the whole thing was based on disloyalty and betrayal and cheating of the worst kind. The hero was the one who could cheat the most. You shall not steal. Everything was looted. Even golden teeth from corpses. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Think of the policy, the so-called the big lie, and that no matter how absurd what you say, if you say it long enough, loud enough, people would somehow believe it. And that curious last commandment, you shall not covet. But this was a sort of plundering of Lebensraum, more territory, more this, more that, rule the world. Now, when you have this kind of upside-down morality, it's not difficult to say that it flows from the absence of God. And you do have here anarchy. And that, I think, is the most powerful image of evil at work.
In turning to the metaphor of the broken Ten Commandments as his description of the Holocaust, Hugo Gryn shows that evil can be seen as the inversion of order, the turning upside down of values. Evil is not a deviation from good, as sin and wickedness are. Evil is the elevation of wickedness to an absolute good. Milton captured the sense of it when his Satan in Paradise Lost proclaims, "Evil be thou my good." Evil is such a radically different concept from bad that you'd expect people to use it sparingly, and this is what we observed in our study. The word is reserved by most people for exceptional horrors, which may be as unforgivable as they are inexplicable. But the very power and uniqueness of the word has left it open to abuse, and in their enthusiasm for the word, many have debased it by questionable applications. This is the cemetery where Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, claimed that he first heard voices from God. Later, these voices urged him to clean the world of prostitutes. In 1981, Sutcliffe was tried for the murder of 13 women. Before the trial, both defense and prosecution agreed that he was suffering from schizophrenic paranoia. Sutcliffe was not bad, he was mad. The judge, however, refused the pleas of diminished responsibility and insisted on an open trial by jury. Sutcliffe was found guilty of murder and pronounced a personification of evil, a judgment the press celebrated. Bearing in mind that he was transferred to a psychiatric hospital soon after, we might well challenge that judgment that Sutcliffe was evil. I want to suggest that the word evil was used about Sutcliffe in a contentious way, and thus as an attempt to influence opinion. Evil is the strongest term of blame and condemnation we have. To judge someone as absolutely evil is therefore more than an expression of one's opinion. It's an act of great authority. We all revert from time to time to absolutist moral judgments, though clearly their social impact is all the greater if they're reinforced or abetted by people in positions of influence such as judges, politicians, and newspaper editors. The case of Sutcliffe, with its unanimous diagnosis of mental illness, suddenly raised the possibility of diminished responsibility, implying that part of the responsibility lay elsewhere. This could only mean that society, us, was partly to blame for Sutcliffe's state of mind, and thereby his crimes. In demanding a guilty verdict and pronouncing him evil, society ensured that the responsibility remained fully with Sutcliffe.
The controversy over Sutcliffe's state of mind shows that to define an action as evil, we need to know about more than just the deed itself and its effects. The description evil implies that the perpetrator is not helplessly driven, but is responsible for his action. The difficulty in deciding whether a person is evil arises because in the case of evil behavior, it's frequently difficult to tell the person's state of mind. It was even so in the case of Brady and Hindley, though they are almost universally regarded as evil. Robert Wilson was a reporter at their trial in 1965.
This is the place, this is Hyde Magistrates Court, the place where Ian Brady and Myra Hindley first faced justice for what later became known as the Moors murders. As the committal went on and the subsequent trial the following year, I came to realize that I was looking at two very evil people indeed. There was a general presence of evil about the two that I think transferred itself to everyone. There was this aura that was almost demonic about them.
This sense of malevolent presence seems to suggest that people like Brady and Hindley are driven almost helplessly by some mysterious force. But at the same time, there is a contrasting feeling that evil individuals are fully in possession of their faculties.
Throughout the trial, throughout the committal, Brady and Hindley were both very, very calm, cool, collected, didn't seem to give a damn as to what was going on around them. And it just might as well have been as if they'd been before the court for riding a bicycle without lights. They showed no remorse whatsoever, and that's the way it went until the very end of the trial.
It is a paradox at the heart of the question of evil that in its perpetrators, a sense both of free choice and of compulsion simultaneously coexists. In describing Hindley as evil because she showed no remorse, we imply she was responsible for what she did. Yet at the same time, her evil can be regarded as a form of possession. Some would say the possession was demonic, others would call it madness. This paradox is not new. Indeed, it lies at the center of traditional views of evil. In the story of the fall of man, we're never quite sure whether responsibility for the evils that befall humanity lies with man, with Adam's free decision to disobey God, or with an external malevolent force, Satan as the serpent, compelling man to commit evil. The power of the story derives from the unresolved paradox. And it may be that in such contradictory intuitions we begin to grasp the nature of evil. But that is only the first of several paradoxes central to it. There is a paradox at the heart of the meaning and nature of evil. It cannot be resolved, but it illuminates our understanding. A similar illuminating paradox lies central to our relationship and reaction to evil. One of those who has studied our attitudes to evil is John Carey, Professor of English at Oxford University.
One of the classic studies of evil is the figure of Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost. Milton gave him a character and a voice such as he had never had before. He alone among the inhabitants of heaven dares to claim equality with God, a sin for which he and his followers are hurled into hell. But Satan builds a new empire in hell. He proclaims his own unconquerable will and his courage never to submit or yield. Satan in hell speaks not only as a Renaissance imperialist, but as a Renaissance explorer, daring to venture into the unknown.
But first, whom shall we send in search of this new world? Whom shall we find sufficient? Who shall tempt with wandering feet the dark, unbottomed, infinite abyss, and through the palpable obscure find out his uncouth way?
Satan takes on this mission himself and revenges himself on God by bringing about what he's best known for, the fall of man. It's not, however, the wickedness of Milton's Satan that's attracted generations of readers. It's his magnificence. He's a great orator, an inspiring leader. Milton gives him the best lines, as when he greets hell, his new home.
Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors, hail, infernal world. And thou, profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor. Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
Satan, before his fall, had been the most glorious of all heaven's angels. He was called Lucifer, a figure of great personal magnetism with outstanding powers and genius. For our times, the archetypal evil figure is Hitler. We tend to demonize him. We imagine him as an evil monster. But really, of course, Hitler was, like Satan before his fall, glorious, lovable, trustworthy, and a brilliant leader. Or so it seemed to the German people. This film was a major vehicle for Hitler's propaganda campaign. It succeeded in exploiting Hitler's major quality, his will, the unconquerable will of Milton's Satan.
Der sich als Träger seines besten Blutes fühlen und dieses wissend zur Führung der Nation erhoben hat und entschlossen ist, diese Führung zu behalten, wahrzunehmen und nicht mehr abzugeben.
The magnetism of evil can be seen not only in world leaders like Hitler, but in criminals who, apart from their crimes, were obscure and unremarkable people. The mass murderers displayed here, in Madame Tussaud's Chamber of Horrors, did nothing apart from murder that could hold our interest for a moment. Yet we give them front-page news and make films about them and display them as a spectacle for millions of people to file past. One example is Dennis Nilsson, who on his own admission killed 15 men between 1978 and 1983. His disposal of the corpses was peculiarly vile. He cut flesh from the bones, chopped it small, and flushed it down the lavatory. Discovery and arrest came when a greyish porridge of human flesh was found to be blocking the sewage pipe outside his flats. You might expect such horrors to generate nothing but repulsion.
No, I'm intrigued. I mean, it's a morbid curiosity, I suppose, that's inherent in everybody. I don't know why. There are people here today whom I've heard saying, oh my goodness, don't look there. And they don't want to, but then the majority of people do.
Although it's disgusting, it might abhor you. You're naturally drawn towards it. I don't know, it's really perverse, but you're just actually drawn towards these characters. It's like the Moors murderers. People like that, everyone's fascinated on the TV when you see all these pictures about them going back to the moor and everything. You want to know why they're doing it.
Chamber of Horrors has, in any case, a sort of murky, perhaps evil atmosphere in places. And probably this is the one part of Madame Tussauds where visitors read captions extremely carefully. People spend a lot of time absorbing not just the written facts, but also the facts that they can read in the faces around them.
What is it that excites the imagination of generations of observers eager to stand close to a lifeless effigy of a murderer? Why should evil, even when abhorrent and disgusting, fascinate? One answer was suggested by a German theologian called Rudolf Otto. During the early years of the 20th century, Otto visited many different countries, investigating the ideas people of different religions had about the supernatural. He wanted to find whether experience of the supernatural could be identified. All religions, he found, seemed to focus around a sense of holiness, which defied description, yet was unmistakably recognizable. Otto put this question to his readers: can you recall ever having had an experience of something inexplicable and radically different from anything you had known before? Did it frighten and attract you at the same time? Otto didn't think there was a word that captured the unique quality of this experience, so he coined the word numinous, after the Latin word for a deity, numen. Numinous feelings were very difficult to communicate to others in words, but they could be awakened from the spirit by the interplay of darkness, emptiness, and silence in natural settings like these underground caves. The architects of temples and churches have made full use of semi-darkness that glimmers in vaulted halls to evoke that numinous feeling. And so have the architects of these, the Hellfire Caves. They were the site of secret activities during the 18th century by an intimate group of people who called themselves the Hellfire Club. The inner circle of members attended chapter meetings here regularly, although there are no records to indicate what they did. But in the 18th century, it wasn't uncommon for those in search of spiritual enhancement to form secret societies. Any number of activities could assist them in this aim: learning esoteric knowledge, performing strange and mystical rituals, or simply meeting for companionship in places that exuded an atmosphere of great mystery, fear, and excitement. They were very religious men, believing in the power of God and the devil to influence the mind. This stream must have fascinated members too. They named it the Styx, after the mythological river which separated this world from the underworld. Otto believed that the source of good numinous experiences lies in some invisible, transcendental reality beyond the senses. Following Otto, the hypnotic hold evil seems to have on our minds might be seen as a numinous experience caused by a supernatural force, but of a malevolent nature. To believe in this would be rather like believing in the reality of Satan. And for thousands of Christians throughout the ages, this has been an article of faith. But many believe that the fascination aroused by evil stems not from something external, but from something within our own imagination. At the turn of the century, Joseph Conrad explored this question in his classic story about the magnetism of evil, Heart of Darkness. Conrad's story was the result of several months spent on a river steamer in the Belgian Congo, working for a trading company. He was appalled by what he saw of European colonialism, its greed and its cruelty. In the novel, Conrad's spokesman, Marlowe, goes upriver to find a company agent called Kurtz, an exceptional man, everyone assures him, who's set up a barbaric kingdom among the natives.
This is the end, beautiful friend.
Conrad's story was used by Francis Ford Coppola as the basis for his film Apocalypse Now. Instead of the pitiless folly of European colonialism, we have the pitiless folly of American intervention in Vietnam.
The end of everything that stands the end.
In the film, Captain Willard is dispatched into the depths of the Cambodian jungle in search of a renegade American officer, Colonel Walter Kurtz, who has set up his own barbaric kingdom in the primeval jungle. Willard's mission is to assassinate the crazed lunatic Kurtz. But as the boat penetrates upriver, Willard's attitude towards Kurtz undergoes a transformation.
At first, I thought they handed me the wrong dossier. I couldn't believe they wanted this man dead. Third generation West Point, top of his class, Korea, airborne, about 1,000 decorations, etc., etc. I'd heard his voice on the tape, and it really put the hook in me. But I couldn't connect up that voice with this man. Kurtz knew what he was giving up. And the more I read and began to understand, the more I admired him.
Kurtz had been a star officer. Like Satan, he was glorious before his fall. Against the senselessness and atrociousness of the American war effort, Kurtz offers command and personal magnetism, to which Willard responds despite himself.
He was close. He was real close. I couldn't see him yet, but I could feel him. As if the boat were being sucked upriver and the water was flowing back into the jungle. Part of me was afraid of what I would find and what I would do when I got there. I knew the risks. Or imagined I knew. But the thing I felt the most, much stronger than fear, was the desire to confront him.
What is it that draws Willard so obsessively towards Kurtz? We can interpret Willard's journey as a voyage into the heart of darkness within all of us. To meet Kurtz is to confront our human potential to sink to the lowest possible depths. But Willard's attraction to Kurtz may be due to something quite different. It may stem from his admiration for Kurtz's pure will, the unconquerable will Milton's Satan boasted of.
Though Conrad's observations were made nearly a century ago, they describe with great accuracy the ambivalent nature of our relationship to evil. We are repelled by evil, but we also display a morbid obsession with it. We sometimes even seem to admire it. And this may be the best possible evidence that we are probably in the presence of true evil. But what could explain this twofold nature of our fascination with evil? Dr. Anthony Storr has been a psychiatrist for the past 40 years. One of his areas of specialization has been the psychology of human destructiveness.
There is undeniably an intense interest in so-called evil figures. Take the case of the Moors' murders. This case, more than any other, exemplifies the public's obsessive, almost morbid interest in evil. It reached its peak when an unprecedented media circus descended on Saddleworth Moors to report on the police search for further victims of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. One reason for our morbid interest in the case is that Brady and Hindley's dreadful crimes find echoes in the deepest, darkest recesses of the minds of us all. We all carry within us a potentiality for revenge and sadism. Of course, this doesn't mean that we're all potential murderers, far from it. Nevertheless, the individual who rapes and murders a child isn't quite so remote from ordinary people as we would like to believe. All parents know that, however kindly and well-controlled they generally are, there are times when children are so irritating and so undermine their sense of authority that they become full of rage. Then, what may have started as necessary discipline or merited reproof becomes a kind of internal fury, which is difficult for the parent to control. Of course, most of us would never kill a child, and the situation I've just described is very different to sadistic murder. But I have to point out that all of us do harbour violent impulses of a very nasty kind, however well we usually control them. So one reason that we have a morbid fascination with cases like that of Brady and Hindley is that we see in them something of ourselves. We are examining in ourselves and our own potential for evil as we contemplate them. More damage than Brady and Hindley did can be done by natural forces, accidents, shipwrecks and the like, but they don't fascinate us in the way that Brady and Hindley do. Evil people enthrall us because of the shocking vision of the worst side of ourselves they provide.
The impact of the Moors' murders on us typifies the ambivalent attitude that evil provokes. But we know that our ambivalence about evil can be more disturbing than that. There are times when evil is so compelling that our attitude verges on admiration. What explains this? Back in the 17th century, one of our greatest dramatists explored this question in a story about an ambitious soldier who meets three witches who can foresee the future. They tell him he will be king one day.
All hail, Macbeth. Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis.
All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor!
All hail, Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter.
Duncan comes here tonight.
Macbeth tells his wife, who in turn encourages him to murder Duncan, the present king,
No one goes hence.
Tomorrow, as he purposes.
and take a short cut to the throne.
Never shall sunlit morrow see.
This he does, and in doing so sets in motion an overwhelming tide of murder, mayhem, and evil. The play provides us with a special insight into our attraction to evil and to evildoers. Jonathan Miller, who has produced and directed many of Shakespeare's major plays, considers the way the dramatist evokes our admiration of evil a recurrent and compelling theme.
People are fascinated by Macbeth because it expresses, in a very vivid and often melodramatic way, something about, in this case, exorbitant ambition leading people to perform what we call evil or wicked acts. I think plays of this sort bring to the surface all sorts of feelings which we have inside us, things that we would like to do, things that we would like to do to others, overreachings which we would like to indulge in, which the moral restraints of ordinary civilized society prevent us from doing. I think any character who is involved in extremely violent conflicts between the moral imperatives of society and the instinctual imperatives of the individual is glamorous and interesting.
And with thy bloody and invisible hand, cancel and tear to pieces that great bond which keeps me bay.
Now this takes us back to the figure of Lucifer in Milton, who seems to be the most intelligent of the angels. And in that sense, what we see are people who question the social order, who seem, for some reason, to have a much more clear-sighted view of the social order, and can often, therefore, manipulate it to their advantage. And I think that it's dishonest of people to assume that they are merely repelled. To be repelled as strongly as that, I believe, presupposes also some strange, hidden, unacknowledged desire to behave exactly like that.
The ambiguities in our conception of evil and in our relationship to it account for much of its mystery. But evil also mystifies because it defies the mind to find an explanation for evil deeds. Is an account of the roots of evil possible that makes sense in the modern age? That is the subject of the next program in this series.